As summer winds down, I'm all about refreshing my wardrobe with staple pieces for the season ahead. Quince nails it with the luxe essentials that feel effortless and look polished, perfect for layering and mixing. Their styles are so versatile, I find myself reaching for them again and again. By working directly with top artisans and cutting out the middleman, Quince gives you luxury without the markup, and they only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes. Recently, while traveling, I found myself texting my POTC co-host to let them know that I was wearing my pink flowy Quince sweatpants and feeling both cute and comfortable. So join me in elevating your fall wardrobe essentials with Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
It's part of the human experience. Breakups, unhealthy love, losing yourself, all of it. When I do couples sessions, I remind my clients that my goal isn't to get you guys back together or save the marriage. My goal is to get you guys to be a more authentic, whole, honest version of yourselves. And then if because of that, the relationship works out or the marriage gets stronger, great. But if it doesn't, I feel like the relationship is the byproduct of two people in it and where they're at.
That was John Kim on Psychologists Off the Clock.
We are 5 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, author of Act for Burnout and Act Daily Journal.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and the author of an upcoming book on developing your confidence and social skills.
From Boston, I'm Dr. Yael Schoenbrunn, faculty at Brown University and author of Work, Parent, Thrive, and an upcoming book about misunderstanding.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hey listeners, this is Yael. A quick reminder to stay tuned until the end where you can hear my co-host post-chat with Emily Edlin. Also, as a reminder, you can now listen to the podcast ad-free by becoming a supporter on Patreon. You can link to Patreon on the POTC website or go to patreon.com/offtheclockpsych. And if Patreon isn't for you, but you want to help us out, you can do so by sharing this episode with somebody that you think might benefit from hearing about breakup wisdom. Now, here's the show. Today, I'm joined by John Kim, widely known as the Angry Therapist. John is a licensed therapist, engaging speaker, fellow podcaster, and best-selling author whose works include It's Not Me, It's You, Single on Purpose, and I Used to Be a Miserable Fuck. What makes John's approach unique is how he shares therapeutic wisdom through his blog and Instagram using authenticity and transparency to connect with and support people on their personal journeys. Welcome, John.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I've been following your Instagram for a long time, and I have to say it's always interesting to follow other therapists, and you do such a great job of sharing wisdom, but also showing up really authentically. And I am kind of curious about what that decision was like for you when you first became more public in your persona about sharing your personal journey as a therapist when, in our field, it's often the case that we kind of hold back a lot of our personal stuff.
Yeah. When I was in training to become a therapist, I was also going through a divorce. And so I started a Tumblr. This is before social media. And so I had a nice runway of vomiting my feelings and pulling the curtain back. I was doing it just as a kind of a therapeutic tool because I was going through a divorce. But then I realized people wanted to know who their therapist was. People are less interested in the name, the letters after your name, and more interested in who you are. And so I kind of like accidentally showed myself. It was never like a strategy thing or anything like that. And that was like 2010. And so when social media came out, I just continued on, right? And now it's become the norm to be authentic, to show yourself as a person first, instead of like what you do.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that is the norm on social media, but I think like in the field of therapy, at least in the kind of training that I received, it is a
Yeah.
lot of, in training, you receive a lot of recommendations to kind of be really careful
Right.
about the boundaries that you draw. And I just think you're right that because of social media and the way that we sort of portray ourselves publicly more and more, it has become more the norm to kind of share more. And it's interesting because you can kind of see it enter the mainstream media in terms of how it gets portrayed on TV, like in
Mm.
the new show Shrinking. I don't
Mhm.
know if you've seen it or if you've had the opportunity to talk much about it, but there's characters like Jason Segel who
Mhm.
really kind of shows up in this very authentic way. And there's interesting conversations that happen between therapists about what is the boundary, what should the boundary be so that your clients can relate to you, but that they don't feel overly invested in your story so much so that it overtakes their own. And I'm just curious if you have thoughts on
Yeah,
that.
my clients don't live with me,
Yeah.
but I started to kind of work unconventionally, doing things that therapists weren't supposed to do. Like I remember asking a client to meet me at Silver Lake. There's a lake here in Los Angeles. It's about an hour walk, and so that was our session, doing a walk and talk. I used to meet clients at the coffee shop, and then I was using webcams when it was a huge no-no. Like before
Yeah.
Zoom, it was people were still on AOL and dial-up, and I was using the webcam to see clients from all over the world. And I called myself a coach because as a therapist, that was so taboo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's literally not permitted. And yet, what I think your work shows and what we're finding more and more is that, like, when you let the boundaries go a little bit in thoughtful ways, there's so much more opportunity for connection. And you make the point that it's a lot more cost flexible because you don't have to
I
rent
was
an
broke.
office.
Yeah, I was broke then.
Yeah.
But now it's a choice, not because I'm
Yeah.
broke now. Yeah.
Oh, I like your authenticity there. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about your new book, Breakup on Purpose, A Catalyst for Growth, which is such a terrific book and I think so important because you break down so many of the myths that we have about breakups and offer so many powerful tools. But I just want to start with this paradoxical gift that you talk about because in your book, you write something that really struck me, which is you wrote, "My divorce was both the hardest thing I've ever gone through and the single greatest event that ever happened to me." And this paradox is really powerful. So I wonder if you can walk us through how something so painful eventually can transform into something so valuable.
Yeah, I think our breakups can be the greatest catalyst for growth. Only if you don't live there, meaning if you're on a road to healing and forgiveness and, reflecting on what happened and also like your ownership in that, because the soil for growth is so rich because after a breakup, you can now, when you're ready, examine, the black box and see why the plane went down and then start to take ownership. And then you could just learn so much about yourself, about love, what you want, what you don't want. A lot of people after a breakup, they miss that step and the soil calcifies because they end up finding love again or they're, too uncomfortable to be alone. And I'm just encouraging people that if you're going through a breakup, this can be a pivotal moment in your life that can catapult your growth and evolution.
Yeah. And I think seeing that possibility is so empowering on so many levels, but it does really redefine how we think about breakups. And you make this point throughout your book that there's this cultural notion that a breakup means like a failure, like you
Yeah.
failed at the relationship.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is it's a little bit like transitioning from fixed mindset to growth mindset, which you talk about a good amount in your book. It really does help us to kind of rewrite the narrative of what a breakup means.
Yeah, I even I know I call it a breakup because that's how everyone defines
Yeah.
that. But I like this idea of calling it an expired relationship. Just the word breakup creates panic and sets people at the fight or flight. This idea of this big part of your life shattering. It just sounds very devastating, and it can be. I get it, but I love believing that it wasn't supposed to last a day longer or end a day sooner. I love the idea that relationships also expire as long as people are doing the best they can to build something, and that when it no longer feels honest to them and they've really worked on it, that it's okay that it's expired.
Yeah. Well, can I ask you about this sort of interesting tension that exists between getting more comfortable with the beauty of a breakup, right? That it's sort of like an opening of new possibilities and this fact that you acknowledge, and I think relationship research suggests this too, is that people have a tendency to kind of give up on relationships too soon. Like they don't do the work necessary to work through, because all relationships have tough points, even the healthiest of them. And so how do you sort of balance this tension between people can give up too quickly and we also need to sort of embrace, like, maybe this is time to walk away from this relationship?
Yeah, this is the big question that no one's going to have a blanket answer to. It's going to be unique to your situation, who you are, where you're at in your life, your relationship. But yeah, this is what's difficult is, how do I know when to leave? Did I do enough? Is the relationship not fixable, or am I leaving too soon? Right. So I've also been guilty of leaving too soon. This isn't a pro breakup book. This isn't it's better to be single, although I have a book called Single on Purpose as well. But this is a book that's turning your breakup into breakthroughs, right? So this is about focusing on things that are power-filled, not staying in the trenches and feeling like a victim or that your life is over because the relationship ended. So I'm not telling people just start breaking up and don't do any work. I always have this answer. It's kind of a go-to answer. But when you've done everything you could to fix the relationship, and remember, you're only half of the relationship, right? Even if you were quote unquote perfect, you're still 50%. There's another person involved. When you start breaking up with yourself, I feel like, because there's your partner in the relationship, but if the thing that's greater than both of you is now causing you to break up with yourself, if you're abandoning self, if you're disconnected with self because of this container, the relationship may be expired. It may not be aligned with you anymore.
I love that answer, actually. And I don't think that there's, any one simple answer, but that's such a beautiful answer to kind of look at your relationship with yourself. And is the relationship with a partner causing you to distance from yourself? That needs to be at the core of many of your decisions.
Many of us lose our relationship with ourselves when we find love, because, the feeling of love, because of, codependency and distorted definitions that we grew up with, that love means giving everything. Love means someone completing you. Love means sacrifice, compromise of self, all these things, which is romantic, but not healthy.
Yeah. It is romantic and not healthy. And it is, I think, one of the really powerful messages that comes through in your book is that breakups are often an opportunity to sort of confront that miss that we sometimes have, like, especially in earlier relationships. If you've made mistakes and sort of lost yourself inside relationships, that a breakup is really an opportunity to kind of pause and say, oh, what work do I need to do on myself to become whole so that I can become part of a healthy, functioning relationship over time.
Yeah, and also let's state the fact that you're supposed to lose yourself, at least in the early years, right? Like, young love is all about losing yourself. You have to go through that, so then that's what that felt like. I wasn't in love, I was in lost, and I was codependent, and whatever, anxiously attached and meshed. You got to go through that, so then okay, that led to this road. That led to, disconnect or me not liking myself or whatever. And so now I want something different, right? I think if we never experienced that, if from high school on, all we got into were healthy relationships, how would we even know what healthy looked like, or unhealthy?
I love this point. And this was something that really stopped me in my tracks when I read it, because you frame breakups as a rite of passage. And I think this is so true. And I think we need to talk about this more in our public conversations about relationships, because it is how we grow. It is how we learn both about ourselves and ourselves in relation to other people. And recently, I actually caught myself having an oddly matter-of-fact conversation with my teenage son about how heartbreak is inevitable, that he's going to break hearts, that he's going to have his heart broken. And I have this question in my mind of, are we doing our children a disservice by not preparing them for the emotional skin knees that come with relationships? And this question of, like, how the cultural avoidance or demonization of breakup conversations actually ultimately intensifies their pain.
Yeah, I think it's part of the human experience, breakups, unhealthy love, losing yourself, all of it. When I do couples sessions, I remind my clients that my goal isn't to get you guys back together or save the marriage. My goal is to get you guys to be a more authentic, whole, honest version of yourselves. And then if because of that, the relationship works out or the marriage gets stronger, great. But if it doesn't, I feel like the relationship is the byproduct of two people in it and where they're at.
I love that. brings to mind this quandary. So I have a background in relationship research. And when you're trying to define your dependent variable, your operational outcomes in marital research, you're often defining it as like relationship stability. But it's always this quandary because it's not necessarily a good outcome for people to stay together if it's unhealthy in the relational sort of living of the experience. And so we kind of do a disservice in the field of research by saying, divorce versus stability, with the assumption being that relationship stability, staying together, is the outcome that people want.
Right. And also, if you know you're done and you're staying in it for someone else or for a different reason, you're kind of taking someone hostage. You know what I'm saying? You're not allowing that person to experience a corrective love experience or be at their highest self, So there's a stunted growth from people being in relationships that have expired or that are not working or that are unhealthy.
Yeah. I want to come back to that because you share a couple of really powerful stories in the book where like one compels the other to stay in the relationship, even though one of them is sort of clear, like this isn't working for me.
Yeah.
I'm going to put a pause in that because one other point that I wanted to ask you about before we move on is this idea that breakups offer this opportunity for this really important self-reflection. And in your writing, you share this in all of your books, you share incredibly honest accounts of your divorce journey, including how you missed vital signals about your partner's unhappiness. And one of the things that I talk a lot about in couples therapy with couples who end up parting ways is sort of looking at their own contributions and what can they learn about themselves in addition, to what can they learn about themselves in relationship to someone else, and to see that as an opportunity to do that kind of self-reflection. But this is a hard thing for us to do because it's so much easier to just be angry and to sort of look for the problems in the other person. So I'm curious, how did you come to that willingness to do that kind of self-reflection? And how do you guide people to do it when the impulse is often to blame the other?
Yeah, I think most of us, we have to lose something. So whether that's a marriage or we have to hit our rock bottom, and then you start looking at yourself, what was my piece in this? So for me, I got married at 29 and I thought, I found my quote unquote, the one, which I have a problem with that term as well. But now I could hit play on life. Now no more pause. Now I could run towards the picket fence and we're going to have the 2.2 whatever kids and the matching BMWs. And now the dream can come true. And none of it did because 5 years later, she wanted a separation. We're just kids. We weren't ready for marriage. And I think the greatest gift she gave me was her silence, meaning once we separated and then eventually became a divorce, she drew hard lines, and her silence and her boundaries is what forced me to cross the great divide from boy to man, to build a practice, to find my North Star, to do all the things I should have been doing in the marriage. But instead, in the marriage, she was everything. So I revolved around her. I didn't have a life. I didn't have friends. I had nothing. And so when she left, it was very obvious that I had nothing. But I needed that slap in the face. I needed to see that without this other person, I had no life. And so that's when I started building life. So at 35, I started building life. Went back to school, became a therapist, all that stuff.
I think it's so sweet that you credit her with setting boundaries that kind of pressed you to look at yourself. But I guess I'm kind of curious about this piece of humility that I think you maybe naturally come by. But I'm curious how you counsel people who seem really invested in not looking at their own part. And I think it's self-protection. It's sort of this sort of self-righteousness of, I know I did everything right. And in your writing, I think it comes across in this very supportive way of, we need to look at ourselves. Even if you are not responsible, you are a part of the dynamic. But in the room, and I will say this is just a therapist, I'm asking you for clinical guidance here. It can be hard to press people to look at their own thing because it is so self-protective, and it does require a level of humility that I think feels very threatening for people. Yeah,
of course. I mean, holding up mirrors. You know that saying, you could lead a horse to water? I always say to my clients, I'll only work as hard as you do. So if your client is not willing to roll the sleeves up and take an honest look at themselves, then I don't think you're ready for this. It's also the same with like fitness trainers. Like if you're like, it's the new year, I want to lose weight, and blah blah. But then if they don't come to the gym, like there's no change. So that's why I said for most people, it requires them losing something or hitting some kind of rock bottom where they're like, okay, now I'm ready. Yeah. It's hard.
Yeah. Well, and I love how in the book, some of the cases that you describe, you sort of are honest that, there are instances where people just weren't yet ready to do the work. I think in at least one of them, you sort of lost track of the client because they didn't return, and you sort of recognized like they weren't yet ready to sort of do that deep dive into what was going on for them.
Yeah, many. I mean, don't you find also clients that they see you in maybe a couple sessions and then they disappear? Or they do a lot of talking that is based on defense and pointing fingers, and nothing really changes.
Oh, yes.
And then you have a client who's like ready to really dive in, a client who's courageous and reflective, and you feel so great because you're like, this is what I signed up for.
Yeah. I mean, there is like something so qualitatively different about somebody who's ready to do the work and somebody who isn't yet ready to do the work. And what I often think about, and I think this, I'm going to guess this is what you think too, because I think it's sort of sprinkled in your book, is like, sometimes our job is just to kind of plant the seeds of like, there is more to be discovered here. There is change to be had. And if you're not ready, that's okay. Just know that like we believe as a therapist, as people who have studied this for a long time, that so much is possible when you're ready to kind of do the hard thing, to do the hard thinking and self-reflection.
Yeah. And it's hard to connect dots until you look back. So, at 35, after my divorce, I was terrified. I didn't know who I was, where I was going. I didn't have a job. I was just, what am I going to do with my life? I had no friends. And so I had no idea that this is where I would land as long as I was working on myself and active. Had I known at that time, you're going to start getting book deals and you'll have a full practice, you'll be running like all the stuff that I work in unconventional ways and that feel honest to you. If I knew this was going to be where I would land, I would have no worry. But then also if you're not worried, there's nothing at stake, and then you're not driven, you're just waiting. And so it's really interesting about life is like, you can never know how things are going to unfold. So you have to trust that the work you put in is going to lead you somewhere. And then you're going to look back and be able to connect dots. And that's why I say that the divorce was also the hardest thing, but then also the biggest first domino, the biggest catalyst to my growth. If I didn't go through that divorce, I don't know what I wouldn't be a therapist. I don't know what I would be doing.
Yeah. You wouldn't have created this really cool professional life that is really like from the outside, it just looks incredible.
I think I would just be a struggling artist in Hollywood because I was a screenwriter. And, before I became a therapist, punching keys and thinking of clever dialogue. And I'd still be a miserable fuck, that's for sure.
Why choose a Sleep Number smart bed?
Can I make my site softer?
Can I make my site firmer?
Can we sleep cooler?
Sleep Number does that. Cools up to 8 times faster and lets you choose your ideal comfort on either side. Your Sleep Number setting. Get early access to Sleep Number's biggest sale of the year. 25% off the i8 bed, our most popular. Plus free home delivery. Limited time. All Sleep Number smart beds offer temperature solutions for your best sleep. Check it out at a Sleep Number store or sleepnumber.com today.
This is your before and after story. Prepare for an incredible career in nursing. At Southeastern College, experience expert hands-on training. Learn real-world skills in our professional lab and simulated settings. And train for opportunities as a practical nurse, registered nurse, or career advancement with our RN to BSN program. At Southeastern College, your future is bright. Visit sec.edu to get started.
So, one of the things that emerges from what you're saying is that wisdom comes from learning, processing, and changing yourself through action. And I think that in the midst of a breakup, that can be hard to remember. It can be hard to sort of stay optimistic that this pain can translate into something that will serve you ultimately. And in fact, often when we're in the throes of a breakup, or as you more cleverly write, the expiration of our relationship, it can really feel like the end. Like it's hard to see a next door opening. And people often feel like, there's no more. Like I gave up my chance. It's ruined. And what I love about your story that's so inspiring is that you say, like, it wasn't until 35 that you started on the career path. It wasn't until 40 that you got your first book deal, because it does sort of demonstrate to people that, like, you might think it's over, but there's much more of life to live, and there's much more goodness to grasp if you don't give up. But it's hard. I mean, I just sort of want to talk about, like, if people often go into a depression, right? There's something neurological and painful that happens during that expiration of the relationship that causes us, our minds, to develop this narrative of, like, it's over. And so how can we help people, or how can we sort of move through, if we are the people that are going through it, and hold on to hope while still kind of honoring, like, this is very painful and needs to be validated and sort of treated with a whole lot of compassion.
Yeah. You have to think of something greater than you, because I don't want to minimize how hard it is. I've had many breakups, including a divorce. And it feels like the world is coming to an end. I think the more it's hard to get back up, maybe the more unhealthy the relationship was. Meaning it was so powerful, whether we're talking about trauma bonds or the enmeshment of two people, it was so sticky that when you're pulled away from the relationship, one of the reasons why you may be hopeless is because without that relationship, you have no legs, you have no sense of self, right? A lot of people who go through expired relationships, if they are a whole person with a life, like, my divorce would have been much easier if I had a purpose and a life. I mean, of course, I would be heartbroken. It would be very sad, but I would have, I would have at least had this other thing that was greater than me. So circling back to what I think is the secret ingredient is, you have to put weight on things that are greater than yourself. So for me, it was helping other people, men's work, doing nonprofit, but also your story is greater than yourself. So the act of me not only embracing my story, but starting to share my story, we're talking about social media and Tumblr or whatever. There's a tipping point where your story becomes bigger than you. And then you have to get out of your own way, because now your story is helping other people. And I think that's where we could wear that cape. That's where we come out of the trenches. That's where we realize this is hurtful. This is sad. This is devastating, but it's also meant, and there's something greater happening.
Yeah. And there is, like, this idea of post-traumatic growth, but to your point, it's sort of like balancing the, like, holding of the pain and allowing yourself to sort of sit in it and, like, take care of yourself with this sort of connection to, like, okay, I need to keep moving. There's something greater at stake here.
Yeah. Not only is there something greater at stake, there's something greater happening that isn't even about you. That isn't about the relationship that expired. There's something greater happening. There's a hero's journey that you're meant to go on. And as you slay your dragons and come back the other side, come back to the village changed, that is required for you to live out your purpose and what you're meant to do. That is greater than you or that marriage.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me a lot of one of my favorite books of all time, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Viktor Frankl, yeah.
Yeah, and he talks about, like, we can make meaning out of our suffering. And ultimately, what's really important is not to ask what we want from life, but what life wants from us. Like, to see ourselves in the service.
And I don't know, how long was he in concentration camps?
Yeah, he was in a concentration camp.
Yeah.
I don't know for how long. It was, during World War II.
Yeah, being in a concentration camp, but finding meaning in a concentration camp, which, I mean, that's why the book's so amazing, is how extreme it is, right?
It's so extreme. Yeah, it does kind of put into perspective most of our modern day problems. Not all of them, but many of them. But it's so beautiful because I think he does really demonstrate sort of the power of finding meaning in something greater than yourself, and how it not only helps you to survive, like, unthinkable situations, but to really, like, bring out the best in yourself and other people.
It also is telling in our society how much weight we put on romantic love, because for many people, that's the only meaning they have. And so without it, they have no meaning, right? So I think one of the things that we need to redefine is, when it comes to relationships, love, it's not all just romantic love. We have friends, we have family, we have brothers and sisters and community, and, this whole kind of, like, village kind of idea that we have lost. And then now we're just like waiting for this one single person that's going to fulfill all our needs. And it's a setup. It's a trap.
Yeah. It's such a trap. It's such a false bill of goods. And I think you're 100% right. And this is something that I think a lot about I have a few patients who are deciding to go down the path of single parenthood because they didn't manage to find a partner to raise a child with. And some, would have preferred to do it that way anyway. But there's this sense of like, oh, I didn't succeed, but actually like how beautiful. And those individuals, many of them are able to find community with other single parents and to feel really connected. And I think you're 100% right that we sort of over-index on the importance of a single monogamous partner, and we neglect the power of the broader social network.
Yeah.
And it puts too much pressure. It makes it that much harder to have a successful romantic partnership if you put all of the pressure on it.
Yeah, not only that, but life is about more than just romantic love. I mean, look, I'm a hopeless romantic. I love love. I'm anxiously attached. Of course, it brings me so much joy to love someone. I've been in many relationships, but that's not all I do. There's creative energy, there's movement, there's so many other things that you can build that will give you joy and, rewards besides romantic love.
Well, that's actually a nice segue into talking about, so there's more than one kind of relationship and more than one kind of love. There's also more than one kind of breakup. And your book talks about a whole series of different kinds of breakups. And I love this idea that breakups are not a monolithic experience. And so we can't respond to them in a monolithic way. And I love this part of your book where you say, we categorize love styles and attachment patterns and love languages. And breakups, too, need to be understood as having distinctive qualities that demand different responses. So when someone identifies the specific nature of their breakup, how can that help them transform what they need to do in response to it?
Yeah. So I list 8. I always thought, like, why, when we talk about breakups, we're not talking about the different types. Then I thought to myself, if you're going through what I call, say, a flat soda breakup, where it just, over the years, the relationship has died and people don't hate each other, but they're willing to just kind of go their own ways. That's very different than, say, blindsided breakup, where you wake up one day and it just comes out of nowhere. So what you want to work on is going to be different. So blindsided breakup, you're in fight or flight. You just had an emotional hit and run. There are other things that you have to work on to stabilize and to focus on, like your nervous system, which is going to be very different than, say, like, the flat soda breakup, where you could still be friends with this person. And maybe the breakup happened before even the breakup happened. So what is prescribed is going to be different depending on what kind of breakup you're going through.
Yeah. So one of the things that I also love in terms of the prescriptions that you offer for managing this period after a relationship ends is that it is okay to engage in self-comfort. In fact, it is a kindness to yourself to, sit on the couch and have a Netflix binge or, take time off of work or whatever the thing is. But there is this question of like self-comfort versus avoidance. And so, how do we help people distinguish between healthy self-comfort and behaviors that might actually hinder healing?
So this was in here because I think we bash people for being depressed or for locking the door and not wanting to talk to anyone. If you want to do that for a little bit, it's totally okay. You just can't stay there. You know what I'm saying? So if what you feel like you need is to not talk to anyone, or to look, if you want to feel sorry for yourself, if you want to just eat your feelings, that's okay. I think that's part of it, is moving through that. But I'm also not saying to do that for 3 months. I'm also not saying to, lose your job and your friends, And so you're going to have to gauge for yourself, and you got to be honest with yourself. But yeah, you can be quote unquote depressed for a while. Something traumatic may have happened to you and it's activating, and that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I love this sort of like carte blanche, like you have permission to do something self-indulgent.
Yeah.
And I love that you have this line in there is like, you can, do whatever the thing is that feels self-indulgent and self-caring, but set your timer. It's kind of like give yourself an amount of time.
Yeah. And then the question is, well, how long do I set it for? It depends on you, and you know yourself the best. So what are the patterns, unhealthy patterns that if you let go for too long, they will become the norm, so that could be addictions, that could be, whatever, drugs, food, sex, whatever, yourself. So yeah, set that timer.
Yeah. I often will advise people, and I try this myself when I get into a funk, is like, give yourself a day if it's like, something significant. And then the next day sort of ask yourself, can I just try? Can I try to like sort of get back to real life? And if it's like, not yet, then try the next day. But like, you don't let yourself off the hook for more than 24 hours. Like you try to sort of get back up to doing real life. And if it sort of goes on for more than a few days, you probably need to get some assistance. But it's sort of like, even as you're sort of doing the self-indulgence, kind of test yourself. How about today? How about I reach out to somebody? How about I go for a walk or a run? How about I, go back to work and try to distract myself with something that feels productive, and sort of push yourself even as you're sort of giving yourself a little bit of permission to take the foot off the gas pedal.
Yeah. And also tell people what you need, because your friends will be like, fuck that guy. Let's get you back out there, get on this dating app. And if you need space, and if you don't need anyone to be a cheerleader right now, that's okay, right? I always use this concept of having smart feet, meaning the days that I felt discouraged and lonely and I wanted to just stay home and, order in, I said, just have smart feet, just get to wherever that thing is. And so sometimes I was a CrossFit box. So getting to a community, getting to a fitness class, or sometimes it meant just getting on my motorcycle, or sometimes it meant getting to the beach. But trust your feet that wherever you're going to go, then that environment, that space, those people, that community is going to help carry you, right? So the beach is like, I just needed the sand. I needed to play some 90s music and just, I needed a somatic experience. Community. So when you get into a community, their stories, friendships, chest bumps, whatever, it's going to help you. It's going to carry you. A fitness class, a yoga class. You go to a class, you get there, and then you're following a program. So at least for that hour, you're going to be out of your head and out of your house. So have smart feet.
I love that idea of smart feet. Let me ask you a specific question. This actually wasn't on my list, but it's just occurring to me now, which is that I think you have a combination of things that you recommend and that worked for you that were like healthy coping mechanisms, like in addition to the unhealthy ones. Like, it's good to have the healthy ones in there: community, moving your body, getting outside. I think community is so important. But one of the things that I think can be really challenging during like the aftermath of a relationship falling apart is, particularly for introverts who kind of go internal, that motivation to seek community may not be strong. In fact, you may sort of decide to like really isolate because you just don't feel comfortable. And yet what we know is that even for introverts, connection is really important. And I know you self-identify as an introvert. And so I'm kind of curious what your recommendations are, that if you are an introvert and your default is to kind of go inwards and retract, what should you do? How should you handle that default response?
Yeah, I love that you said connection, because for many, community may scare them. For many, if you are an introvert, the community is like, oh, now I got to go and meet people and force myself to be who I'm not. But connection, doesn't matter if you're an introvert or extrovert, that's a human need. And so connection can be one friend. Connection can be a family member. Connection could be with your pet, So like, I love the word connection, whatever that means for you. Community is one way to connect, but it isn't the only way. I tell people I found myself through barbells, donuts, and motorcycles. And a lot of that connection was actually connection to my solid self, a connection to the 12-year-old that I put in a hope chest when I had to grow up and pay taxes, right? So part of me buying a motorcycle was no one ever let me. My parents said no. Every girl I dated said too dangerous. And so my entire life since I was 12, I felt so free on my little Honda Spree scooter back in the 80s. I never had that feeling because everyone said no. So for me, connection was buying my first motorcycle at 35. So that there's a connection in that had nothing to do with being extroverted or going to a party.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that idea of connecting not just to yourself, but like to different versions of yourself, like the child self that, you're like reawakening in this new phase of life. That's beautiful. So I'm going to transition to this idea of boundaries that you had mentioned before. And you had mentioned that your first wife had set strong boundaries and that was really helpful for you. You make a compelling case in general for really kind of separating, like making a strong boundary between yourself and the person that you're parting ways from. And I'm curious how firmly you advocate for that. And the question in my mind is, particularly in situations of like co-parenting, it is very hard to set a firm boundary.
Sure.
And so how do you help people navigate that delicate balance between creating necessary emotional distance, but also engaging in the ongoing communication that's necessary to raise children together?
Yeah, I think it starts with an honest conversation with yourself and then with someone else, like a therapist, like a neutral party. So you could actually kind of process, engage, where lines should be drawn. Because a lot of times we're going to draw that line with chalk instead of Sharpie, or we're going to draw that line too hard when it's okay to not. But I really love this idea of processing it with someone else, a coach, a therapist. So you just get a second opinion. And usually I would say don't process with your friends or family because they're going to be biased. If they hate your ex, those lines are going to look very different than what may feel honest to you.
Well, that kind of brings an interesting question to my mind is like, how should you lean on friends who, if they are your allies, are going to be super biased, and yet you want your friends by your side? In a sense, you may want your friends to hate on your ex, but sometimes that can sort of breed more toxic feelings than would be helpful. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Ask yourself what you need. What do you need? What kind of friends do you need? And listen, if you need these type of friends, but the ones that are calling are these other type of friends, it's okay to send them the voicemail. And if they don't call back, they're not your friends. So like you get to decide, okay, right now I need this friend that is very neutral and always listens and doesn't, give me a lot of advice. You don't have to like call everyone and say, I don't need you right now in my life, but this is your recovery. This is your rebirth. This is your becoming. And so you get to decide how it's going to be. You get to design your program.
That reminds me of something that Brene Brown said, and I'm going to butcher it, but she talks about like having the wise friend or family member. I think it's like for her, it's her sister, but like the person that you call who kind of knows the right thing to say. And maybe in the context of a relationship expiration, you have like particular friends who are more likely to strike that balance of advice giving, compassion, and sort of to do that, like ask that curious question of yourself, like who is the person who I could talk to that would be most helpful in the space that I'm at right now?
You're talking about friends with high capacity. You're talking about friends with EQ. You're talking about friends that aren't just social, but know how to hold space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So in your experience, what are the lessons that seem to emerge from the rubble of broken relationships? And I'm talking about like the wisdom that people really couldn't have gained any other way than through a relationship breakup. So this is kind of coming back to this idea that relationship expirations can offer us something really, really powerful. So I'm curious, like what transformative insights have you witnessed repeatedly in both your clients and perhaps your own journey that are sort of like through a relationship expiration, they arose for you?
Yeah, I would say for me, the person that we choose to love, and I even now believe that the person that we choose to love isn't just our choice, but I believe that there is something greater happening and we collided with this person for a reason. Not to get too woo-woo, but I do believe that humans attract and meet, and it's not just because of, someone has nice teeth or because they're funny. There's more happening. And I think we're attracted to that person because they are what's prescribed to heal a lot of parts of us. Unfortunately, it's going to be activating. Unfortunately, when the honeymoon is over, the person that can heal us is also going to hurt us, is also going to activate things in us we may not want to look at. But what's really beautiful about relationships is that we can heal through each other. And I think that's the biggest takeaway. What's not to be a Debbie the Downer, but what's sad about this life is we spend most of our adult years trying to repair what happened in childhood, right? And the beauty of a relationship is when you love someone in a healthy way, the relationship container itself can start to heal the people in it.
The thing that came into my mind as you were talking about the power of our adult relationships to heal wounds that happened at any other time in our lives is there's a book called The Power of Discord that is co-written by Ed Tronick, who was the lead investigator on what's known as the still face experiments. It's an experiments where they brought a caregiver, an infant, into the laboratory.
Yeah.
And then they would sort of have the caregiver go flat.
Right.
And the child often would get distressed because when your caregiver sort of disconnects emotionally, it's very unsettling. And the really dominant take home from that research is that like disrupted connection is very problematic for infants. But actually what Tronick writes in his book is that the take home that they intended for people to get is that this rupture and repair cycle is part of relationships. It's how we grow as individuals, and it's how we grow relationally. And so exactly what you're saying is what the research suggests too, which is like, we need those messy breaks. We need those messy exchanges with somebody that we care about in order to learn and grow and become more fully wise in our lives. And we need to not wish that away for ourselves. It doesn't make it comfortable or fun, but we need those experiences to learn and grow.
Yeah. And what a great place to end on, because I was going to say the other thing that I continue to learn is the value of repair, the corrective love experience, the safety that your body feels when you realize that this time someone's not going to leave because you're yourself or because you got into a fight. All of that stuff, I think, is required for us to expand and grow. And then it produces relationship glue, and then we get to show up differently to our friends, family, children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I wanted to end with just like a quick line from your book. And I also wanted to just comment for listeners that I loved so much of your book, including the fact that you have a list of breakup songs. So check out the book for many reasons, including John's playlist. And I love this line that you finish with, which is those chapters of your life that you want to rip out are crucial. Like relationship expirations really are painful, but there is something so powerful that can come from doing the work of moving through them. And so I think your book just really offers a lot of powerful wisdom and tools. And before I let you go, where can people go to find out more about you and your work?
At The Angry Therapist across social. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much for making the time to chat with me. It was such a treat.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Welcome to the co-host post on Breakup on Purpose with John Kim, which was a really fun episode to do. I follow him on Instagram, so for me it was like meeting a celebrity. And we have done a few episodes on breakups, and I just think it's a topic that is worth talking about more often because goodness knows most of us have been through at least one breakup, and goodness knows they are painful. And so I think having frameworks within which to understand why breakups happen, how we can recover is just so useful. And I really loved a lot of the wisdom that he shares in his book and in our conversation. So Emily and I are here to discuss it further. Emily, what were your thoughts as you were listening to the conversation?
I found it so refreshing overall. It was such a new, to me, take on breakups and just how to conceptualize the experience that is such a human experience, yet so painful, as you said. No one wants to go through this, but I think the reframing of the experience was incredibly healing to even listen to and reflecting on the past. I'm not currently in a breakup, thankfully, but we all go through this. So what stood out to me, though, is a bigger conversation is I hadn't really thought of this before, but I've been very in tune with how social media and the wellness industry really push optimization and perfectionism. And this is very true in the parenting world, that we're supposed to do everything perfectly and then we will never have discomfort is the underlying message. But I hadn't really thought of how that applies to romantic relationships. And this conversation brought that up for me, that somehow it's like a failure if our romantic relationships fall apart.
Yeah, I think that that's a really important takeaway from this. And he has in the book, and as listeners will know, we talked about this during the conversation, but he talks about breakups as a rite of passage, as something actually, that is a part of how we grow as individuals and as relational beings. And I just love that framing, that it isn't something to avoid. It isn't something to fear. It's actually just a part of how we learn and grow, and a part of life for all of us. And that is a good thing. It's not a comfortable thing. It is not pain-free. There are ways that it can go south and that we need to be mindful of. But it isn't something to be afraid of or again, to try to avoid. And in fact, the experience of it, even if it doesn't feel good in the moment, can be something that is very transformative.
Right. And I think that people often go into a dark place of self-blame, questioning, what did I do wrong? I'm not good enough for the other person. There can be that spiral effect. So I think normalizing the expiration of relationships as part of relationships in general can hopefully minimize that tendency to be so hard on oneself.
Yeah. And I'll just leave listeners with one quick pivot in a question that you might ask yourself, because I think that question that you just posed, Emily, of like, what did I do wrong, is a common one that our minds go to. But we can fairly easily transform that into, what can I learn from this, either about myself or about relationships or about what I'm looking for. And turning it into a growth experience isn't sort of the panacea either, but it's a way to help move ourselves away from self-blame and into something that feels a little bit more productive and forward-moving.
Well, and I think since I can't not talk about parenting, I'm sorry, but I had to host my oldest through her first breakup a few months ago.
Is that right?
Yes. And it was quite painful. However, she said to me, as she was, very upset, appropriately, very sad, she said, I just really need to feel sad for a little bit. And then that'll help me feel better faster. And I was like, wow.
Dang, you got 5 kids.
So we've been able to talk since, over time about what she learned about herself and what she wants out of a relationship, and how she, relates to dating differently moving forward, and how it really was a growth experience. And so I'm hopeful that the next time around, she's just more equipped and knows she can get through it in a different way than the first time.
That's so beautiful. It sounds like through the parent-child conversation that you had about it, it really helped it to become kind of a rite of passage. And it sounds like she really has a lot of wisdom already at her disposal, which is so cool.
Yeah, I'm not sure where she got that.
I'm going to credit you. But we hope that folks got a lot out of this episode. Definitely reach out to us with thoughts, comments. We're now on Substack as a monthly newsletter. And in the future, if folks are interested, you can listen to Psychologists Off the Clock with an ad-free experience by signing up on Patreon. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. You can now listen to our podcast ad-free by becoming a supporter on Patreon. You can link to Patreon on our website or go to patreon.com/offtheclocksite.
If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review and sharing this episode with a friend or an enemy who would enjoy it.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our fabulous newsletter on Substack. Or if you're still addicted to social media, find us on Instagram and LinkedIn.
We'd like to thank our rockstar production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
Now for the boring part. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.